Okay, Ji, let's start. So, today's topic is checking the accuracy of data. You might be wondering, uh, why are we talking so much about data? I mean, since the start of this chapter. So the thing is that, of course, data is what we feed the computers in with, and that is what we have to work with all the time. So there's so many things that data needs to be checked against to make sure that whatever it is that we are inputting into the computer is correct, or it is dependable or trustworthy in a certain way for it to be processed correctly and uh, to produce the desired results that we want from it. Now, how is this topic a little different from what we have done so far? Well, to begin with, we looked at what data exactly is and how data can be converted into information. That was the very start of it. But we do know that we input data into the computers, and when we input data into the computers, it must be checked for its accuracy in some way or the other. All right. Now, one benefit that computers give us compared to manual ways of working is that with manual ways of working, such as paperwork, writing down something or recording something on a piece of paper, is always prone to error. Yeah. And they say there's this popular phrase that says, to err is human. You might have heard about it. To err is human. It means that human beings are bound to make mistakes. Well, you cannot say that. I cannot say about myself that I can never make a mistake. Nobody, I mean, even Einstein or anybody else could not say that he could not make a mistake. So to err is human. Well, you are bound to make mistakes when you're working. With computers, one thing that we have to understand is this, that the more we have to type, the more are the chances of error. The more we have to input the data that has to be typed inside, the more will be the chances of error. And again, that's a standard way of looking at it all over the world. So somehow, either we find ways of inputting the data into the computer where, well, typing can be at times eliminated, or it can be minimized. There are ways of doing that. Particularly, you might have come across situations where, let me give you a quick example of this. When you're filling an online form, sometimes you have to select your country, right? Now, have you noticed that you are never asked, when you're sort of filling in an online form, you're never asked to type the country. Instead, you are given a drop down menu which you select on, and then there's an entire list of countries available. You just have to pick and choose. Now, this is one example where typing is being eliminated, or the need of typing is being minimized. And why are all these things being done, or why are things designed in this way on computers when data is being input? To reduce the amount of typing that you would require from the user. And there are two main objectives. One is reducing the time of input, because making selections and inputting data in that way will be faster compared to having to type in. Then, wherever typing is involved, it would always be time consuming. Some people have better typing speeds, others do not have. So that the time that it takes to input the data would be variable. Yeah. And the last factor that I just spoke about a while ago is, the more you have to type, the more are the chances of making an error because you're typing. All right. So wherever it can be eliminated or minimized by giving options such as the one that I just, the example that I just gave you, you must make use of these to achieve two benefits. One is minimize the amount of errors in the input, and number two would be so that it takes less time to input the data. These are the two key objectives. Now, our discussion on checking the accuracy of data is based around this. I've just given you a little background of what I'm talking about. So, there's a term that you see written here. Let me highlight or underline it. Have a look at this term, validation. You might have heard about it. Okay. Now, what is validation in context of computers or computer programs? By the way, when we use the term validating something, we probably mean that we want to judge the authenticity or correctness of something. Like, okay, if something is valid or not. Okay, I say, okay, is my passport still valid or not? Is my ID card still valid or not? What do I basically mean by that? Is it within the date of usage or has it expired? So is it valid? Can it be used or it cannot be used? Is the data that I'm inputting into the computer valid or not? Is it acceptable? Is it correct to be considered acceptable to the computer? So this is what basically I try to do when I validate the data using computers. By the way, validation is, if I were to define what validation is, I would say that validation is a process of ensuring that whatever data that is being input inside a computer is accurate or correct uh, to its purpose. That is what I would say. And another aspect to validation is this, that validation is something that is not a manual way of checking for errors. It is not a manual way of checking for errors in your input. Instead, it is a computerized method of checking for errors in data. What do I exactly mean by that? When I use validation in my programs where I have to input any data, I do not have to really worry about what is it that I'm inputting, because I have some checks put in place that would validate the data at the time that I input it. So the checking for accuracy or correctness is being carried out by the computer program itself on its own, without I really have to worry about it. Did you get it? Validation is an automatic process of checking for data's accuracy while it is being input into the computer, but it is performed by the program. User does not have to really worry about it. Well, user has to worry about it in some way, but that is something that I'll come to a little later. But as of right now, you can say that when you input the data, it will be checked by the program itself to ensure that the correct data is being input. And if at all the data is not correct or it has any error, it will be reported by the program in the form of an error message. Now, when that error message is flashed on the screen or it pops up on the screen, it is then that the user's attention is grabbed to let the user know that whatever you are inputting is actually not correct and you must correct it before it can be input. So what is happening here is, notice one thing here. What is happening here is that the computer is checking on its own to make sure that erroneous, incorrect data can be stopped from being input, because if that data is let to go through to the processing stage and then based on that any outputs are produced, those outputs will be faulty or they will not be according to the kind of results that you're trying to produce. So if we are not going to get the results out of the computer that we are looking for, then what's the purpose of using the computer? So it all starts from the input stage. This is what the sequence is: input, process, output. You first input something into a computer, then it gets processed, and then the outputs are produced. So if at the time of input we are not being careful, or we input data which is not right, which is not correct, and then it gets processed and certain outputs are produced which are not according to our requirement or specification, then we cannot blame the computer. Then we will have to blame ourselves for inputting the wrong data. Validation is at least making it possible for us to deal with it in some way or the other to ensure that the data which is being input is correct and is accurate. So one thing that you have to remember about validation is that it is an automatic process of checking for errors in data by the computer program while we input it into the computer. All right. Before I move any further into this, I would like to share a simple example, just to put things into perspective, so that you get a direction that what is it that we are really talking about. Okay. Let's take an example. Say, for instance, you are creating a new email account. You are creating a new email account. You will have to fill in an online form for that. Okay. And in that online form, you will be required to provide certain information, right? And within that, some information will be more important than the rest of the information. Have you ever noticed one thing? We have a form here where we can see this example actually. Let me maximize it so that we can see it a little more closely. Notice one thing here. You see these fields on the form, right? These are called fields, by the way. Now, if you look at this field, the name field, do you see a little star on it? By the way, this is something like this. Okay? You do not see that with last name, but you see that again with address. You see that again with city, state, zip code, but you do not see that with phone number. But with email, you again see that star. And we all would have come across this at some point in time. Now, the fields that have this star with them, it usually says that this is required. That this is required means that the data that you're inputting into this form cannot be processed until unless you supply or you input data in this field. It cannot be left blank or empty. But the one that you do not have the star with, is not a mandatory field to be filled in. It's an optional. And you would usually find, there are situations when you find optional written with certain fields, that this is optional. Optional means that it is okay even if you do not input any data in here. But the ones that have this star with them means that, well, it is mandatory to input data in this field. And when we say mandatory, this means that the entire information cannot be processed without inputting data in this field. So it has to be provided. Now, say for instance, you're filling in a form for signing for a new email account. Can you afford to leave the box that asks you to select your email ID? Can you afford to leave it blank? Can you? You cannot, because you are creating a new email account. How can you leave the option for selecting an email ID blank? Can you create an email account without that? You cannot. So it would be a mandatory field, right? Now, say for instance, while you were filling in that form, you left that field blank accidentally, for example. And then, after having filled in a number of other fields, you proceed to the bottom of the form and you click on submit. Would the information be submitted? It would not be submitted. It would actually give you an error. It would say, well, this field either has not been filled in, which must be filled in, or the data input is not correct. What is this? Where this error comes in, this is validation. You did not know about it. According to you, you had filled in the form and now you could proceed to submit and move on. It was only when you clicked on the submit button that you realized that you have made an error somewhere in filling in the form. Maybe you have left a mandatory field or a compulsory field blank, or you have input incorrect data in one of the fields. And it would also highlight those areas. Usually those boxes would be colored in red or something like that. The border would be red, so that visually as well the user can see that wherever they have made a mistake. Now, what is it behind the scenes that is checking all this? It is the validation rules that you would have applied onto those fields to ensure that whatever data is being filled in by the user, or whatever data is being recorded by the user, is recorded correctly or it is input correctly. Was this automatic? Was this done by the program itself? The example that I gave you? It was. It was, because I was just telling you, you had proceeded to submit without realizing that you had left an important field blank. It was the program that told you by using an error message, by flashing an error message on the screen, that, okay, well, you have made a mistake, or you have left an important field empty that must be filled in. So behind the scenes, there are validation rules applied that are actually letting you know about the mistake at the input stage, which you must correct before you can submit that information. So this is one practical example of how computer programs or computers can ensure that the data is validated at the time it is input into the computer to stop any errors from being committed or made at the time of input. All right. And when the data that is going inside is error free, of course, it would be processed accurately and it would produce the kind of desired results that you're looking for. Is it making sense? Okay, good. All right. So, well, there are a number of validation rules that we need to study in this particular course, and every validation rule has a specific purpose, so we can have a look at them one by one. For example, but before that, let's quickly go over this definition that has been given here. It says validation is the process of checking data, of checking that data matches acceptable rules. Those rules have already been implemented by the person who designed that program. He would have implemented those rules, programmed them into the program, so that when the program is used, those rules are used to check the data against any incorrectness or inaccuracies, and it can be corrected. So there are some acceptable rules for all sorts of inputs, and validation would just ensure that whatever data that you're inputting matches those rules of acceptability. If it is not, it should be reported. All right? Okay. Now, the first check in this discussion that we can talk about is the presence check. And it is the presence check that I just gave you an example of. Yeah. So now you can say that the example that I just gave you of not leaving a field blank that must contain data in it, which is mandatory to be filled in. So behind the scenes, there's a presence check that is at work that ensures that any field that must be filled in is not left blank. All right, let's have a look at the description. It says a presence check is used to ensure that the data is entered. It will ensure that wherever data must be entered, it is entered and it is not left blank. If data is entered, then it is accepted. If it is entered, then it is accepted. If data is not entered, then the user will be presented with an error message asking them to enter the data. Because the program knows that this field cannot be left blank. So this kind of a check that the program carries out on the user's input is called a presence check. So this is one of the validation checks that we have just spoken about. So presence check is what? It is a type of a validation check. Next in line is a range check. Any idea, anyone, what a range check might be? Data is? Yeah, data lies within a specified range. Good. Range check would ensure that the data lies within a specified range. And if you look at it, range check would actually be applied or applicable on numeric data only. Because numeric data can have ranges. Alphabet data cannot have ranges. You know, we can't say that, okay, please enter a name which is between this and this. We can't do that. But we can always say that enter an age between this and this. So there could be ranges, yeah, or there could be limits. So range means that there's a certain set of acceptable values that can be entered. Any value that would be entered outside it would be considered out of range and would not be accepted. For example, the one that the example that you just gave. Say for instance, there's an exam that has a total mark of 100. What should be the acceptable range of values in terms of marks from 0 to 100? 0 to 100. There is a possibility of getting a 0. There is a possibility of getting 100. And of course, there's possibility of getting any mark in between. But the possibility of getting 0 is there. The possibility of getting 100 is there. But is there any possibility of getting a mark below 0? No. Is there a possibility of getting a mark above 100? No. So, a range of 0 to 100 in terms of marks is what is marking the range of acceptable values or acceptable data for a particular field. Such as, say, for instance, the name of the field is marks. So, in this, you can say that this is the lower limit. This is the lower limit in this range, and this is the upper limit. The lower and the upper limits in a range are inclusive of the range. Inclusive of the range means that 0 and 100 are included in acceptable values, and all the values or all the numbers within it. But any value that is outside it, such as a -1, would not be acceptable. Such as a mark of 101 is not acceptable. Maximum 100, minimum 0, and all the values in between. Yeah. Okay. So whenever we are making use of ranges, uh, there's a certain type of operator or operators, I should say, they become very important whenever we are specifying ranges. And those operators are these. These are those operators. Can anybody tell me what these operators are called? You must be familiar with all these operators. You would have used them. You must have seen them in different situations. You must have used them as well. But what are these operators called? Let me see if we have more. No, we don't. Okay, anyway. Not all of them are here, but some of them. So this is the greater than operator. This is the less than operator. What is this called? Greater than or equal to. This is less than or equal to. There's another operator which is, let me write it down here. This is equal to. This is the symbol that we use for equal to. All these operators combined are called, these are called comparison operators. By the way, comparison operators in the context of our course are very, very important because they will be used in a number of situations practically. Practically, when we do our practical work, we will have to make use of comparison operators. Where will we have to use them? Well, we'll have to use them in our database topic. We'll have to use these in our spreadsheet topic, and we will also have to use these in our programming topic, the JavaScript programming for the web. We'll have to make use of the comparison operators at some point in time. So it is important that we know what comparison operators are and how do we use them. And of course, the actual use would come in when we are practically doing it. Anyway, so if I were to put in this validation rule into the computer, say for instance, I'm talking about a field that is called marks. Let me do the illustration somewhere else so that I have more space to write. Okay. Say for instance, I have a field marks, and there's a cell or a box in which I have to input the marks. So it's like it's a field where I have to input the marks. The range for marks is the range for marks is what? What was the range? And then we can come to the expression. The range was 0 to 100, so our range is 0 to 100. Now, if I want to make sure that the value that the user inputs in here lies, I want my program to ensure this on its own. I want the program to ensure this, that whatever value the user inputs in here lies within 0 and 100. How do you think I can put this rule as a mathematical expression in my program? How would I program it? Yes. Greater than or equal to 0? Yes, very good, very good. Well, I will have to put in this rule like this. Well, I will put in a rule that says greater than or equal to 0 and less than or equal to, say for instance, this is how the rule has been implemented in the program. Once implemented, now I do not have to worry about anything. The rule is there. The range check has been applied. All right. Now, when any user of this program, when he enters the data, if he puts in a value which lies between 0 and 100, where 0 and 100 are included, there would not be any problem. But if the user tries to input a value that is something like this, because of the fact that this validation rule is there, it has already been programmed into the program. The program will give me an error message. It will give me an error message that, well, the value that you have input is not acceptable. All right. And usually when error messages come, or when error messages are flashed or they're displayed, usually you would notice that the message is written, or the message is communicated in a very simple form. Why? Because the person who is using the program might not be a technical specialist. He could be just like, a simple user of the program like you and me. So if the message that is produced is going to be very technical in terms of the terms used, the user might not understand what it means. So we have this option. The people who program validation rules into programs, they have this option that they set up the language of the validation rule in a way that makes it very easy for any normal person, any novice, to read the message and understand the mistake that they have made. So maybe the error message that is flashed says, you have input an incorrect value, please enter a value which is between 0 and 100. So this is a very simple way of communicating the error. So when this type of an error message is flashed and you notice that, well, the value that you have entered is 105, and the rule says, the message says that the value that is acceptable is only a value between 0 and 100, then you will know the mistake that you have made and then you will correct it. Say for instance, it was a case of mistyping. I'm not saying that, well, somebody knows that the maximum mark is 100 and you're still, entering a mark which is 105. What if it's a mistake? आपने जल्दी में टाइप करते हुए 100 प्रेस करने के बजाय 105 प्रेस कर दिया, right? So, and if you did not notice and you moved on, the error would get through if the validation rule was not there. But since the validation rule was there, you made a mistake accidentally, not knowing that you had mistyped. When the error message appears, it is then that you realize that yes, you have made a mistake which you had sort of overlooked. So you would correct it, make sure that you put in the correct data according to what is acceptable, and then you move on. So what did the program do here? What did the validation rule do here? It made sure that incorrect data is stopped from or stopped from being entered into the system. Are you getting this? Yeah? Okay, good. So this is what a range check is all about. One little variation to a range check is, I think it is mentioned here somewhere. Yeah, it is a limit check. So some students in the class uh, kind of knew what the range check might be. There's another check called the limit check. You see any difference between a limit check and a range check? Okay. And there is no range, you're saying. Very good, exactly. And in case you're wondering how he knows it, well, he has read the entire chapter already. So you see the benefit of going ahead of the class a bit. You, whatever topic is then being done in the class, at least you have some idea of what's being taught. If you would have read it from the book, you would be able to relate it better to what the teacher is, explaining in the class. It has benefit. You are more interactive. You understand certain things beforehand, and then you can contribute well in the class. So he told me a couple of classes ago, and I remember it, of course. So there's a huge benefit of this. Yes, बिल्कुल आते हैं. You're very right. They are included in the O-level CS course. They are also included in the O-level ICT course. Validation rules are a part of both these courses and O-level. Exactly, exactly. Okay, you wanted to say something? Yeah, nothing? All right. अच्छा देखो, how is a range check different from how is a limit check different from a range check? Range check has a range of acceptable limits where there is a lower limit and there is an upper limit. So there is a range of values. Limit check usually only has one boundary. Can we say here that there are two boundaries here? I mean, one boundary is the lower limit, which is 0, and the other boundary is the upper limit, which is 100. So there are two boundaries here. With limit check, there is only one range. There is only one limit to be checked. Okay, is something greater than or less than a certain value, the data that you input. For example, this will make it more clear to you. Let's have a look at this worked example, and this is for, if I'm not wrong, yeah, this is for limit check. Well, how about an opinion poll is taken and asks for respondents' age. There's an opinion poll that asks for the people who are filling in the opinion poll. The respondents have to be at least 18 years 18 years old. The lower boundary is 18. There is no upper boundary, so this is a limit check. What is the requirement? That the people who are filling in this opinion poll must be at least 18 years old. At least 18 or above. But how old can they be? There's no limit to that. But yes, any person taking part in this opinion poll must not be less than 18 years old. So do we have any upper limit? We don't. So how can we put in this condition? We can say, well, age is, make sure that the value that is entered in age is greater than or equal to 18. But we are not giving it any upper limit. This is what the difference is between a range check and a limit check. Let's have a look at another example. Letters representing grades for an exam are entered. Only the letters A to E are valid grades. The grade must be less than F. The upper boundary is E. There is no lower boundary, so this is a limit check. Did you get this? Yeah? Okay. One last example to really, finally differentiate between range and limit check. So this last example is of a range check. So we can easily see how range is different from limit. Limit there is one boundary, okay, but in range there are two. There's a lower boundary and then there's an upper boundary. The number of students in a class must be between 5 and 28. That's the range of the number of students that must be there in a class. The lower boundary is 5. The upper boundary is 28. So this is a range check. This could be written as number of students is greater than or equal to 5 and less than or equal to 28. So this would be a range because we know what should be the minimum number of students in the class, that is 5. It cannot be less than that for a class to constitute, for example. And in a class, our absolute limit of how many students can be there in a class is 28. There cannot be 29 students in the class, according to this example. Okay, so yeah, so there's a range here. Is range and limit check clear? Okay. Next check is the simplest of them all, and this is the type check. Type check simply checks that the data that is being typed is of the correct type. Data that is being typed is of the correct type. What do I mean by is of the correct type? Well, if you can only enter numbers or numeric data in a field, then you must not be allowed to enter alphabets or special characters. If a field is set to accept only alphabets or maybe special characters, then any number that is entered should not be accepted. So it is actually checking the type of data which is being entered. A very simple example could be, you say for instance you're filling in a form and there's a field where you have to put in your name. Can the name field contain any numerics? It cannot. It is bound to have only alphabets. If there's a name field, say for instance, the data that you enter in here can only consist of alphabets. So if accidentally, while you're inputting the data, if accidentally you end up inputting any number in it, it should not be accepted. Again, say for instance, while you were inputting, you did not realize that you had mistakenly mistyped, and in your name, you pressed a key that was a number. If you did not notice and there was no validation rule, the error would get through. But if there's a validation rule such as a type check, it would ensure that, or it would notice that, well, the data that has been entered is not accurate according to the type that is acceptable. So an error message would pop up which would let you know about the error that you have made, and then of course you will be able to correct the error and then move on. So where numbers are to be typed in, alphabets cannot be entered. Where alphabets are supposed to be input, numbers cannot be typed in. All right. So if either way, if you put in something else, then an error would be produced. The examples could be, if age is entered, it must be an integer. If a grade is entered, then it must be text. Yeah. So these are examples other than the example that I gave you, that of somebody's name. If a price is entered, again it must be a number, or it must be numerical. If a date of birth is entered, then it must be in the date format, like this. I cannot enter a date in any format other than this, particularly if the format of the data that is required that I'm inputting is date. I mean, of course, dates are, by the way, dates are numeric data. Dates are numeric data, and dates can be mathematically computed. Dates can be mathematically computed. What do I mean by that? Dates can be mathematically computed. What do you think? In a bit. I got your message. Yes. Okay. Anybody else? Come on. What do I mean by being able to compute something mathematically? In reference to chalo, in reference to dates. Can I can I can I calculate anything out of dates in any way? Sorry? Can I at least find out the difference in terms of number of days between two dates? Can I do that? You do this calculation a number of times. So say for instance you say, well, say for instance you were going out for a vacation. Please listen carefully, everyone. Say for instance you were going out for a vacation. You know the date that you left for the vacation. You would know the date that you arrive back. How would you know as to how many days were you out on the vacation? Well, you will look at the dates. Okay, this is the date I went out. This is the date I came back. So what's the difference between the two dates? That would be the number of days that you were out. Isn't this being? Aren't you doing this mathematically? Yeah. Can I do this somehow on the computer? Yes, I can. All the comparison operators, I would like your attention to stay for another 5 minutes. That's it. Okay. So the thing is, can I somehow put in dates in an expression where I can compute something out of them? Of course I can. Can I use comparison operators with dates? Of course I can. I can use comparison operators with dates because dates are numeric data. Yeah. Now, based on the example that I just gave you, can you think of any other example where dates might be used to calculate something? Yeah. Yeah. Okay. Yes, but that is the same example. Yeah. But how about a different example? Just give me any other example. Can I put in any situation in a program, can I put in a condition on a date where I want to find out, uh, give me, I want the computer database to show me records of all the students who were born after a certain age, sorry, after a certain date. Can I do that? I do not want the record of all the students. I want to only find out those students who were born on or after a certain date. So what will I do? I will put in a condition that says, okay, date greater than or equal to, and then I'll put in the date. When I would run this, it would actually show me only records of those students who were born on this date or after. So isn't it that I am doing a mathematical calculation, or I'm doing some sort of a mathematical computation on date? And there could be what tens of other examples, by the way. All right, all right. Say something. Okay, okay, good. Okay, good. Okay. All right. So what we can do is we can, although there are some more validation checks that we have to talk about. So of course, all of them cannot be covered in one lesson. I mean, particularly if you get into the detail and the examples. So we can stop it here for today, and the remaining part of the validation checks can be discussed in the next lesson. All right. Okay. So let's stop it here for today.